Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see you here on the third in our series of Great Cloud of Witnesses, talking about ancestor traditions and other ancestor traditions and other traditions. Tonight we have Laura Ellis from Sakya Monastery here to talk to us about Tibetan Buddhism. She's a volunteer and board member at Sakya Monastery. She's been a student of Tibetan Buddhism for about 18 years, and she currently works at the School of Medicine. That's her humble biography. So I'm going to turn everything over to her and we can see what she's got to say tonight. Give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be with you. And I just have to say I'm really impressed with the program, with your program, and that you all are interested in learning about other traditions. So thanks again for having me. So I'll just talk a little bit about Tibetan Buddhism. I have a few slides that I can show you. Buddhists in general do not engage in ancestor worship, and that's mainly because we believe in reincarnation. And so the ancestors don't hang around for very long. They pretty much recycle within 49 days and move on. So while there is great respect for elders and our ancestors who have given us, and gratitude for everything that they've given us, that has made our lives better today, we don't actually worship them as an object of refuge. So our object of refuge is the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhist teachings. So I'm just going to share my slides here. Okay, so this is Sakya Monastery of Tibetan Buddhism. The monastery was founded by a Lama who was born and raised and educated in Tibet, and then came to America when the Chinese communists invaded Tibet, and it was no longer safe for them to stay in Tibet and practice religion. So at that time, many Tibetans had to leave. So he and his family came to America and as refugees, and started from scratch, and somehow miraculously was able to found this Tibetan Buddhist monastery, which is, I think this building used to be a Baptist church. So they worked on it for 30 years and turned it into a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, which when you go inside, it actually is exactly the same as every Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Tibet and India and in Nepal. So it's really kind of a special place. So I just wanted to start by saying, like, there's three different types of Buddhism. They're called the three vehicles, and Tibetan Buddhism is Vajrayana Buddhism. So the first type of Buddhism is the Buddha, and they're called the three vehicles because I guess they all get you to enlightenment, but different people need different methods in order to reach enlightenment, and we're not all the same. So we need different ways to understand the teachings. So there's the Buddha taught three different types, and these different types of Buddhism then went out to different parts of Asia and became, and depending on which translator took it to which part of Asia, then that became the main type of Buddhism practice in that area. So like Hinayana Buddhism, which is the basic vehicle, and their focus is on their own individual enlightenment. So they get enlightened just for themselves. They don't believe that they can help anybody else get enlightened, and nobody else can help them get enlightened. So they're doing it just for themselves. So Hinayana Buddhism is practiced mainly in Southeast Asia, in countries like Cambodia and Burma and Vietnam, Thailand. And then Mahayana, the great vehicle, that type of Buddhism went out to like China and Japan. And it's called the Great Vehicle because of the motivation. So people, their focus is on enlightenment for all sentient beings. So they're not getting enlightened just for themselves. They're getting enlightened for all beings because every single sentient being in the universe is suffering. And the only way to help them be free from their suffering is to become enlightened. And so they will not go into nirvana until they have brought every single sentient being with them. And then Vajrayana Buddhism is also called the diamond vehicle. And it is actually a type of Mahayana Buddhism, where the motivation is still the same, where you're getting enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings, but the method is a little different. And Vajrayana is it's actually the quick way to get enlightened. It's possible to get enlightened within one lifetime if you have the karma, and that's because you have a teacher. So the teacher is really important. And in Tibetan, the word for teacher is lama, and in Sanskrit, it is guru. So you often hear the word lama, like the Dalai Lama, when referring to Tibetan Buddhist monks. All right, and this is just a little geography lesson, just in case anybody wants to know where Tibet is. It is actually this vast area of land, which is now occupied by China, and it's often called the roof of the world because it is, when if you're standing in India and you're looking at the Himalayan mountains. And the Himalayan mountains are right here. The Tibetan plateau above the Himalayan mountains is this plateau, and I think it kind of starts at like 10,000 feet. So that's kind of the Tibetan sea level. So it's called the roof of the world, and Buddhism started in India, and the Buddha got enlightened. I think Bodh Gaya is right around there. If you can see the arrow, that's where the Buddha became enlightened. And then, like I said, his teachings all went out to different parts of Asia. So Hinayana Buddhism went to this area here, and then Mahayana Buddhism went to this area, and Vajrayana Buddhism went to Tibet. And I'm going to show you this next slide. It's a different type of map because you can see how Tibet is surrounded by this, what they call a chain of snow mountains. So there's this plateau in the middle, and then all around it are mountains. So it's really isolated. And these Tibetan monks were practicing Vajrayana Buddhism up there in almost complete isolation for over 1,000 years. And then the Tibetan diaspora happened. The Chinese communists invaded Tibet and were persecuting Buddhists, especially the Lamas, and putting them in jail and killing them and torturing them and doing all this awful stuff, which they still do today. The problem is not resolved. And so many of the Tibetan Lamas had to flee, and most of them fled to India. And there are a lot of Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. They rebuilt the monasteries in India and Nepal. This is Nepal here, this little purple section. So Tibetan Buddhism has now gone all over the world, but most of the Tibetan monasteries are still in India and Nepal. And so what is Tibetan Buddhism? For the most part, it's compassion. I mean, if you ask the Dalai Lama what his religion is, he has been quoted as saying, my religion is kindness. So compassion is equanimous love and understanding toward all beings. And the attitude is, may all beings be happy and free from suffering. And then bodhicitta is this altruistic intent. The reason that you meditate and do any kind of Buddhist practice is to gain enlightenment, not for yourself, but for all beings. And because there's so much suffering in the world. So we meditate on being grateful to all of our mothers, and And it's not just our own mother, because Buddhists believe in reincarnation. We believe that every single, and because time is beginningless and endless, all sentient beings have been our mothers. And then we take what's called a bodhisattva vow, and that is that we will not attain enlightenment until all beings have attained enlightenment. And so where do Tibetan Buddhists practice this? Well, in Tibet, they practice it in monasteries. And this is the Dalai Lama's monastery in Tibet, which he has not seen for the better part of 70 years because he's been in exile. But just one interesting fact, this is an enormous building. And I heard that there are actually 10,000 shrines in this building. That's how big it is. So this is a monastery in India, and so this is where the monks do all of their praying. They start at 5:30 in the morning and they do their morning prayers, and they have a little tea break, and somebody brings a bucket of tea around and sloshes it into their cups, and then they keep going. And so they gather like this at the monasteries in India or Nepal. And then how do we do it here in America? Well, we do it like this. That's me and my daughter. So this is inside the monastery in Greenwood. And as you can see, it looks very much like that previous monastery in India. And the Lama is up there teaching. And there's a huge Buddha. The Buddha is, I think the statue is like 3 times life size. Those ones in India, see those Buddhas there? Some of those Buddhas statues are 2 to 3 stories high. They're absolutely gigantic. Anyway, so this is inside the monastery in Greenwood. So regarding death, like I said, Tibetan Buddhists believe in reincarnation. And it's not just reincarnation as a human. There are 6 realms, and you can be reborn in any one of those realms. There's 3 lower realms and 3 higher realms. And actually, human rebirth is exceedingly rare. They say that the chances of being born as a human is the same as if there were a blind turtle at the bottom of the ocean. And every 100 years, this turtle surfaces. And there's this yoke, like a yoke for an ox pulls a plow type yoke. Okay, like an inner tube. Okay, imagine an inner tube floating around on the ocean. And every 100 years, this turtle surfaces, and the chances of being born human is like the chances of this turtle surfacing and putting its head through that yoke. So anyway, so human rebirth is extremely rare. It's more likely like we'll be born in, the lower realms, which are like the hell realms, the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm. And then there's the human realm, which is the best realm to be born in order to get enlightened, because there's enough suffering and enough happiness. There's a good mix. So it's easier to get enlightened here. And then there's the higher realms, which is the demigod realm and the god realm. And it's really hard to get enlightened when you're a god, because you live forever and you have a great life, and all you have to do is think about it and your wish comes true. And so, and you don't experience any suffering. So you can't get enlightened in the higher realm. So the human realm is the very best. But it's very hard to be born here. And so actually, when we die, we need a lot of help because we go through what's called a bardo. And that's an in-between state. It's in between births. And it lasts for 49 days, and all beings are reborn within 49 days, no exceptions, except if you are an enlightened Lama. And so, and there are these very, very, very special beings called tulkus. The Dalai Lama is one, and they are able to choose their rebirth because they're enlightened. They are not bound by the winds of karma, which just blow them wherever, their karma blows them. They actually can choose their rebirth. But everybody else, 49 days, that's it. So, so we rely heavily on the lamas to do prayers for us when we're in the bardo, because it's a very, very confusing state. This picture kind of represents, what it's kind of like in the bardo. Is just all of these images and things from it's basically mind, whatever kind of random things are going through our mind that manifest in the bardo and cause confusion. So it's hard to make decisions. But there is an opportunity at the time of death, and the opportunity is that we can actually become enlightened. We can become enlightened if we're in the right state of mind and we have the right kind of guidance. There is a chance to become enlightened. And in order to do that, we have to stop clinging to our belief in an independent existence and in the dance of appearances. And we have an opportunity to glimpse the true and abiding nature of mind, to connect to the experience of primordial wisdom, go beyond time, past, and future, and be reborn in the vast, brilliant worlds such as Nunga or Dewachen. And those places are pure lands. Like this picture here is the picture of the pure land of the Buddha Amitabha. So we have these bodhisattvas, and we meditate on these deities. And one of them is Chenrezig, and he's the bodhisattva of loving kindness and compassion. And we visualize ourselves with the body, speech, and mind of this bodhisattva. And hopefully, if we do that enough, then at the time of death, we might actually be able to accomplish that practice and become Chenrezig and go to Chenrezig's pure land. And another one is Tara. She is the mother of all the Buddhas, and she's the mother archetype. She's another meditational deity. She's like, I guess the equivalent would be Mother Mary in Christianity. So how do American Buddhists prepare for end of life? Well, in Tibet, because all Tibetans are Buddhists, they all know what to do. They all have a connection to a Lama or a monastery. They've all been taught what to do when somebody dies. And so it's no problem. If you die, if you're a Tibetan and you die, your family runs off and makes an offering to the Lama, and the prayers get done, and they don't touch your body, and they know how to handle your body, and it all gets done. But in America, a lot of us have non-Buddhist family members who don't know what to do, and they don't know how to handle our body. They don't know how to request prayers. And so we started this, what's called the Next of Kin Committee. And and we prepared a workbook that members can use so they can actually write down their wishes. And then volunteers like me will help their family members when they die to do all the right things. One thing that's really important to Buddhists is that our bodies are handled correctly at the time of death. And because we don't actually believe that when your vital signs cease, that you're dead. It actually takes about 3 days for the consciousness to leave the body. And during that time, the consciousness is searching for ways to get out of the body. And depending on which part of your body your consciousness leaves from, it depends on your type of rebirth. So if your consciousness leaves from your head, that's ideal. You really want your consciousness to leave out of the top of your head. If your consciousness leaves from lower orifices, then that's like not so good. And if somebody touches your body, then your consciousness can kind of it darts to that place in the body, and then it can leave from that place. So let's say you die and you're in a hospital room, and the nurse comes in and touches your feet. Oh, not good. So anyway, so we advocate for people when they're in the hospital. If they die in a hospital or an institution, we advocate for them, with the healthcare workers to make sure that their bodies are handled correctly. And we also then act as liaisons for so that the prayers are requested from the lamas. And so this is my final slide. I just wanted to, in case you have a Buddhist friend and you're wondering what to do if they lose a loved one, here are just a few suggestions. So expressing your condolences is totally fine. Sending sympathy card is a really nice, thoughtful thing to do. Tibetans, sympathy cards are kind of an American thing. It's very thoughtful, and we always appreciate the thoughtfulness. Tibetans almost never give cards unless they have money in them. So Tibetans will give each other money. So they might give somebody an envelope that has money in it so that the family can go and request prayers from the monastery. You could make an offering to a monastery or a temple in the name of the deceased, and whatever merit is generated by that offering then will go to the deceased, and that helps them in their next rebirth. Refraining from strong emotional responses within the 49-day period, because it can be detrimental while the deceased is in the bardo. So, so if you have a friend who is a Buddhist and you're becoming very emotional with them about their loved one, that's not such a good thing to do. But certainly saying their name is okay. Well, you just don't want to, invoke the deceased in a way that is in any kind of negative way, because that can disturb their mind while they're in the bardo. And then if a pet is dying, support your friend in caring for their pet so they can die a natural death. We don't euthanize our pets. So yeah. So that's all I have. I know that was a lot. If I'm happy to answer questions, or I'll stop sharing this now.
Laura, I have a question. My brother has lived in Japan since the 90s, and when he was in college in the U.S., he studied world religions, and he did a deep study of Pure Land Buddhism. And I heard the phrase Pure Land, but I don't understand how it fits into the whole scheme that you showed us. Can you say more about that?
Sure, yeah. So you saw that one picture of the Buddha Amitabha, and in his Pure Land. So there are, Christianity and Buddhism are a little bit similar in that there's heaven and there's hell. And there's a couple of different types of heavens. There's a heaven where there's the worldly gods, and then there's a heaven where there's the enlightened beings. So Buddha Amitabha's heaven is an enlightened Pure Land. And so I think that's where I said where the Buddha taught the teachings, and then various translators and masters and yogis took these teachings and brought them to different parts of Asia. So one of those guys went to Japan, and he must have focused on the sutra that taught about Amitabha's Pure Land, and then that became the emphasis of that spiritual practice. So I wouldn't say it's mainstream. It's not incorrect, but it just doesn't embrace the entire picture, because yeah, you can get to Amitabha's Pure Land, but if you haven't purified all of your karma, then you're going to end up reincarnating in a lower realm at some point anyway. So the way Vajrayana approaches it is we're not trying to get to a Pure Land for ourselves. We're trying to get enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a million questions, Laura. I'll ask one, and then I'll let somebody else ask, because am I having trouble being heard?
No.
Just a little bit. Lean in close.
Lean in.
or whatever. You're good.
Now you get a big, deep focus.
Okay.
All right. So my first question, it's kind of rooted in an assumption. So I'd like you to clarify my assumptions. My assumption is that as Buddhism moved into Tibet, there would have been a blending of Buddhist ideas and indigenous religious ideas. Does that account for why Tibetan Buddhism is so distinctive?
Yeah, so Tibetan Buddhism is, I would say that the Buddhism is pretty pure. They distilled the religion down to, you know, yeah, the religion itself is very pure, because of all of the enlightened masters who have been practicing and teaching the religion. But yeah, at first, yeah, it did mix with the indigenous religion, which was an animistic religion, similar to Native American religion. But they did, I think they did more kind of witchcraft kind of things, and so they did have blood sacrifices kind of mixed in with their ceremonies and stuff, which is a total no-no for in Buddhism. So they had to do a lot of work to kind of turn that around. And these people, I mean, the Tibetans, they're tough people. I mean, it was not an easy place to establish Buddhism, but like I said, there were some really exceptional masters who brought Buddhism to Tibet, and they were able to subdue some of those, demonic forces.
Yeah, Christopher.
Yes. Thanks, Laura, so much. There's a quick question about the body being so important at death and how it's handled. And in the Western world, and even in the Christian faith, there is importance there, that it's respected, and different practices, as you know, with cremation or burial. And it'd be interesting to know a little more about how the bodies might be handled, just with respect. But what happens when, in fact, through an aircraft tragedy or a fire or a ship going down at sea, what happens when there is no body? So what does the Buddhist family do in that case?
Yeah, so that's what we call untimely death, and it's not so good to die untimely in an untimely death. We actually do a lot of prayers so that we are protected from that, and we receive blessings, so we're protected from that. But it does happen, and I think how it affects the deceased is it can cause more confusion, because they may not know that they're dead. And so they may not, when all of these confusing appearances start happening when they're in the bardo, they may not know why it's happening. And so I would say for the deceased, it just leads to more confusion. I mean, beyond the normal confusion. But for the family, what they would do is they would go to a Lama and they would request prayers, and they would ask the Lama to do a divination to figure out if there are any special prayers that are needed. In some cases, there are special prayers the Lama can do for untimely death that can help.
Other folks? Yeah, Jan.
What happens if an autopsy is necessary? I imagine that could be challenging.
Yeah, not good. It's not good. And for the same reason, we don't recommend organ donation either. And I mean, it's like, you know, you think that if you're a bodhisattva and you just want to relieve the suffering of all sentient beings, then why wouldn't you give somebody your kidney or your heart? You know, if you're dead, why wouldn't you do that? And it's because we believe that we're actually much more useful to beings if we're enlightened. And at death, we actually have this chance to get enlightened. There's a brief window of time there if we realize that we're dead and we can visualize ourselves in the form of the deity, in this body of light as an enlightened being, and we actually do it, we can get enlightened at that moment. And you know, having somebody excavating around in your body for organs and things can really disturb your mind, and it can distract you, and it will bring your consciousness back to your body, and then you'll be like, oh my God, what are they doing to me? They're cutting me open. Ah! And you freak out, and then you've blown it, and you can't get enlightened. And so yeah, somebody will benefit from having your kidney, but meanwhile you might be reborn as a fish.
And that wouldn't be so good?
Not well, you know, it happens. It's better than being reborn in hell. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's 18 of them. And but yeah, no, if you have a chance to get enlightened, that's what you're really shooting for.
This leads me to a really a basic question. I want to step way back. In Christianity, one of the key concepts is salvation, and yet I find that most Christians talk past each other about salvation because each of them assumes the other knows what they mean by that. I'm curious what enlightenment means.
It means that you've purified all of your defilements since beginningless time, and you have realized who you were in the beginning. And because all of us are already enlightened, we just don't know it because we have all of these obscurations because of our defilements.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Carol.
You told us that you stay in Bardo for 49 days. What is the significance of 49 days?
I have no idea. I don't know why it's 49 days.
I mean, sometimes numbers reoccur in a certain religion. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, this is one of the things that I take on faith. It's one of the things that the Buddha taught, and I just because there's other things about that the Buddha taught that I realize are true. I just believe that. But there are stages of the Bardo, and you may have heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead is like a guide to those 49 days, and various things happen to the consciousness as it's going through the Bardo. In reality, most people are reborn within 3 weeks, and the sooner the better, because the suffering in the Bardo is really intense. Yeah, but I would say within 3 or 4 weeks, most people are reborn, but definitely after 49 days, nobody sticks around after that, unless they become a ghost. I guess that's one of the exceptions.
Thank you.
Yeah, Darren.
I've got more questions about at time of death. Oh, there's my deep focus again. Enjoy my face. So at time of death, the body can't be touched. I'm assuming there must be some type of disposal. I apologize for the untidy wording, but I didn't catch if there's a cremation or a burial, and I wonder, are there celebrations or family gatherings that happen at that time?
Yeah. So the Lama, so the reason the body can't be touched is because the consciousness is kind of stuck in the body. And Lamas Lamas like the Dalai Lama, who are actually enlightened beings and are able to accomplish all of these amazing practices, they can actually eject their consciousness by themselves. So when they die, they do what's called the POA, and their consciousness ejects through the top of their head. And I've heard it say that some lamas are so powerful at doing this that in Tibet, sometimes they would find the top of the lama's head like 50 feet away, you know, after they had done the POA, because they just blast the top of their skull off the top of their head. And so so that's the reason why we don't touch the body, is because, I mean, for unenlightened beings, we're not able to do that. What we can do is have a lama come and do the POA for us, and that will help eject the consciousness. So once the lama's done the POA, then and the consciousness is out of the body, then it doesn't matter what happens to the body. So at that point, then we can cremate or bury it. And most Buddhists opt for cremation. In Tibet, they did what was called sky burial, where they cut up the body and let the vultures take away the pieces. And I think they did that because the ground was frozen and they don't have very many trees. So they didn't really have very many options for disposing of bodies. But Tibetans would never put a body in the ground, not unless it had a really bad disease or something. Oh, family gatherings. You know what? This is where Buddhism is like really different from Western tradition. Because we believe in reincarnation, we believe that the consciousness is going through this bardo, and any kind of attachment to this life is going to hinder their rebirth. So we just want them to get on with it, with the blessings of the lamas and the triple gem and the Buddha. Just, you know, go and have a good rebirth and forget about this life and forget about us. And we don't want to hinder them. And so so we actually don't do any kind of memorialization during the 49 days. What they do is prayers. So we'll request at the time of death, we request prayers. At the 4th week, which is when most people are taking rebirth, we request prayers. And on the 49th day, we'll request prayers. And that's more, the 49th day is when it's more of like a celebration of life. But it's still done in the context of prayers, because that's the thing that we believe will help the deceased. It's not about us, it's about them.
And Laura, you talked about branches of Buddhism that are for on behalf of the enlightenment of all sentient beings, not just the one. Is enlightenment of all sentient beings an inevitability?
That's the $1 million question, right?
I mean, when I hear, I mean, I'm trying so hard not to compare to Christianity and to Western ideas, so I'm not going to. But I see connections, and they light up things. So I'm just curious what the thoughts are on that.
It must be. You know, in Buddhist cosmology, the intervals of time are so enormous that we just can't possibly fathom it. And so, I mean, for example, there's an eon. So, and what makes up an eon is 13 kalpas. And in one kalpa, it starts at the bottom and then it goes up to the top of the kalpa, and then it goes down, and then it starts all over again, goes up and down, up and down, up and down. They're kind of like waves, and they do that 13 times. That's an eon. So so at the top of the kalpa, beings are, the lifespan is like 60,000 years. And they are so enormous, their bodies are so enormous that the Buddha's robes can wrap around their little finger. And then what starts this degenerative age, and it's going down the kalpa. And at the bottom of the kalpa, human beings their lifespan is like 10 years. So anyway, and so right now where we're at is we're going down the kalpa. We're in a degenerate age, and our lifespan is about 100 years. And that's when the Buddha decided to come and teach. The historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who came, 2,500 years ago, he came and he chose to teach during this period because I guess human beings have the best opportunity for enlightenment. If you live 60,000 years, you really don't have any motivation to improve yourself, right? Like, why? Let's just wait till tomorrow. We got 50,000 more years left, So anyway, so yes, I think at the top of the kalpa, the 13th kalpa, I think that's when we all get enlightened and our bodies all pop like popcorn and we become enlightened, and there's just emptiness, blissful emptiness, and then it starts all over again. And so my lama said this. He was like, do you know what starts it all over again? You guys will appreciate this. He said, male and female.
You're still on mute, Darren.
That leads me to another question then. The monastery that you showed us was enormous. And so I would like to know what's going on in there, insofar as like what's the job of the monastics compared with like regular folk, the laity? What are they doing for the process?
Okay, so the monastery, like the one in India or the one in Greenwood?
Oh, could you talk about both of them if there are significant differences?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, so there's in Tibet, and in India, because now Tibetan Buddhism has moved to India. Traditionally, it's the ordained that are practicing the Buddhist teachings. And so inside the monasteries, you have a community of ordained monks or nuns who are doing prayers and rituals. And trying to get enlightened. Where they're all trying to get enlightened, but they're also doing it for the sake of all sentient beings. And they're praying. In the process of doing that, they're praying for world peace. So they have these ceremonies and prayers that they do, so that they are working towards their enlightenment and the enlightenment of all sentient beings. But it also generates a huge amount of merit, which benefits the world. So and then the lay people, traditionally in Tibetan society, the lay people would be the ones who are supporting the monasteries. So they're the farmers and the nomads and the blacksmiths and so they're making a living in samsara, but they make donations to the monasteries to keep the monasteries going. So they make offerings to the monasteries, and that's where the money comes from to keep monasteries going. And then, of course, whenever anybody has someone who's sick or who has died, then they rush over to the monastery and make an offering so the monks can do prayers for them. So that's what's happening in Tibet and in the monasteries in Tibet and India. And lay people generally, they do their practices at home. So you can see behind me this is my shrine. And you can see the bowls with the water. Those are offering bowls. And so every morning before I do my meditation practice, I make offerings to the Buddhas. And offering the water is actually a practice in generosity, because you're visualizing the water not just as water, you're visualizing it as flowers and incense and food, and you're multiplying it millions and millions of times. And so you're actually making this offering of generosity. And then after I make the offerings, then I do my meditation practice. And then on Sundays, I'll go to the monastery. Well, when COVID isn't around, I'll go to the monastery and I'll do the practice with other practitioners in the monastery. But that's really an American, that's kind of a new thing. That's an American thing. That's our Lama did that because Americans are used to going to church. So, but in Tibet, lay people wouldn't ever go and practice with the monks. They would go to the monastery to make offerings and to request prayers, but they would never go in there and sit down with the monks and do practice.
Sean has a question.
Yes, so I knew that in Buddhism there were monks. I did not know there were nuns. Can you talk more about, I guess maybe the overall duties and the difference between a monk and a nun?
Yeah. So yes, the monks get all of the publicity, but there definitely are nuns and there are nunneries. Um, uh, and they pretty much do the same things. The Vinaya is the part of the Buddhist canon that describes the monastic vows, and there's actually 252 vows that monks and nuns have to live by. So they are extremely disciplined. Um, and they live in community in the monasteries or in the nunneries. They're they're the nuns had a bit of a rough time because the lineage was wiped out in Tibet. And there's been I don't know if anybody's heard about this discussion, but there's been a lot of discussion about this in the Tibetan Buddhist community recently, because there are nuns who want to become fully ordained and they're not able to because there's no living lineage in Tibetan Buddhism for nuns. And so these nuns actually have to be ordained through another tradition. I think there's a Mahayana tradition in China where that goes all the way back to the Buddha. And so those nuns can ordain the Tibetan nuns. So the ordination comes actually from a different tradition. Anyway, so there are fully ordained nuns now in Tibetan Buddhism, and that's only a very recent thing, because I think that the lineage got wiped out. I think it was around 900 AD. In Tibet, there was this terrible, awful king who almost wiped out Buddhism in Tibet. But that's when the lineage got wiped out. But otherwise, not much difference between the monks and the nuns. In fact, they even look the same because they shave their heads and they all wear the same robes, and sometimes it's hard to tell who's a nun and who's a monk.
Yeah, KJ.
How does Buddhism handle things like being LGBTQ, transgender, gay,
In terms of
I mean, do they have an opinion about it? Can they be monks or nuns? Do they,
oh yes, oh
is there-
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's no I don't think there's any. I've never heard of any rules or I haven't heard of anything that discriminates between LGBTQ or anybody else. I have heard that there's, well, I won't go into that. Anyway, we have one of our monks. One of our monks was gay before he was ordained, and he was actually the the manager for the band Heart back in the 80s, and he got a little bit mixed up with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and when he came out of it, he decided to become a monk, and he's an absolutely wonderful person. So I could direct questions to him. I'm not terribly versed in he would know a lot more about it than I would in terms of the ordination and everything like that. I don't know much about the technicalities. I know that somebody did ask my Lama. We went out to lunch once, and someone asked my Lama about if it was good or bad or other about being gay, and he was like, oh, it's just all desire. Same as being straight. Whether you're straight or gay, it's all just desire.
Thank you.
Sean.
Yeah, I have another. So the question I was wondering is, I saw a documentary, um, maybe within the last 10 years, and it was about, and I can't remember what country it was, but they were sneaking out um, videos, and wherever they were, there was a mass execution of the monks. And people were like, they just videotaped talking with them, and then they were gone the next day, and then they were found in, I think, a river. And they found some that were hiding, and they were talking to them, and they said yes, the government was coming in and beat them up and killed many of them. So is this, I don't want to say a trend because that doesn't sound respectful. Is this something that is becoming more common in the different countries that were practicing Buddhism, and why is that?
As far as I know, I think China is the only country or the only government that persecutes Buddhists. I can't think where else that would happen, en masse like that. Um, do you know what color robes they were wearing?
Um, I thought they were like a yellow, like a marigold color, and I thought this was in not up in China. I thought it was more, and I don't want to say Southeast Asia either, but I thought it was more down lower. And they had actually, in the documentary too, there was like this crazy uprising, and they had done that, and then they had shot and killed in the street a tourist. And it wasn't an American tourist, it was a tourist from another um Asian country. And they were like, they had shut down the internet, and people like the journalists were smuggling out like their USBs or their hard drives to let the world know what had happened. And it, but I don't, I'm pretty almost 100% sure it wasn't China. It was somewhere.
Well, what other totalitarian countries do we have in Asia besides Burma or Myanmar? Because I think they have the opposite problem in Myanmar. It was actually the Buddhists or so-called Buddhists. They probably weren't practicing Buddhists, but who were persecuting the Rohingya. So that's interesting. I haven't heard that, and you say that this is happening recently.
I just, it was something that, like I said, I saw the documentary within the last 10 years. My memory's not good. I can't remember. It just seemed like that was just very crazy to me. And then it was like, where are they going to go? What do they do? Are they going to prosecute people or that are practicing Buddhism, as well as obviously they're murdering the monks? It was just very, I guess, scary, and thinking, where would they go?
Yeah, that sort of thing definitely is still happening in Tibet. You have to be very, very careful. But I don't know where that would be happening outside of China.
Did I see Anita's hand a moment ago?
I'd like to know, when somebody dies, what does the grief process look like for the family that's left? You talked about the 49 days and not to refrain to strong emotional responses, but do they have a grief period, or is that not necessary?
Well, of course you grieve, you can't help it. But what you're trying to avoid is grieving with that really intense attachment, like, why did you leave me? Come back. You don't want to be grieving with that kind of mentality, because it will cause the deceased to want to solve your problem, and it will cause them to be attached to the life that they just left, which will cause problems for them. So So I think, of course, people are kind of grieve quietly, but they try to focus on the prayers and they try to distract themselves by praying. And in Tibetan Buddhism, we do mantras. It's also, Tibetan Buddhism is called Vajrayana, but it's also called Mantrayana or Tantrayana. And so we will recite mantras. So whenever you think of your loved one and that feeling of grief starts to overwhelm you, that's when you start saying the mantras.
Yeah, Jan.
Well, I have something to contribute that's a little surprising. Um, there are several musical practices related to helping people transition into death that are used in hospitals. And the one that is most interesting, that sort of parallels what you're talking about, is I'm just going to not get formal. Don't sing the love songs that you and your sweetheart once sang. Don't play the music you used to dance to. Create space in the music. Allow long pauses. And in that time, allow the transitions to occur. But they say that the person that sits at the bedside and sings every love song he ever used to sing to her or whatever is actually hindering. It's kind of interesting because I hear a parallel in what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does sound like a parallel. I mean, I guess if it's comforting to the person, it all depends on the person who's dying. If those songs are comforting to them and bring them peace and make them calm, that's one thing. But if it causes them to be attached and not want to die, then that's another thing.
Christopher and then Darren.
Back to reincarnation, Laura. As I understood it, that quite often the reincarnation process after the 49 days, the rebirth, is not in human form. It's in some other form, a lower form. Is that right?
Well, statistically speaking, that's more likely. I mean, when you look at all of the living beings, including germs and bacteria and insects, and I mean, just think of all the living beings. I mean, we think that the earth is overpopulated with humans, but my gosh, we are just an infinitesimal blip compared to all of the other living beings here. So,
So given that, Laura, then if one comes back as let's say an animal, and that animal is run over by a car, then that sets the next 49 days in the process. Is this ad infinity? I mean, this is going to go on where this life will always have a 49-day turnaround, and you come out as a different living being, whether it was a very short life like an insect or a very long life like a horse.
yeah, it's a real downer. It is. And, that's why the Buddha taught that, the Four Noble Truths, and starting with all life is suffering. Because even if we do experience happiness in this life, it's temporary, and so yeah, and then if you start getting reborn, you start recycling in the lower realms, then there's no chance of learning about religion, because you just don't have the mental capacity for it. So yeah, so there is kind of in Tibetan Buddhism, there is kind of an urgency to practicing religion and to training our mind and purifying our karma.
Thank you.
Darren and then Jan.
So I'm back into the monasticism idea. So imagine I am a devout Tibetan and I've just had my first baby. Am I going to be wanting my baby to go into a monastery? or are my big goals to have that person be like a banker?
Well, yeah, for Tibetans, there would be nothing better than if your kid wanted to go into the monastery. And in the old days, every family would give their best child to the monastery. There's a Lama who now says, in the old days, Tibetans would give their best child to the monastery, and these days they give their worst child to the monastery. But yeah, no, the very, very, very best thing for anybody's kid would be if they become a nun or a monk. But not everybody's cut out for that, especially now that we have so many choices and so much free will. If you come from a family that is really destitute, and your kid can get an education and a meal by going to the monastery, then that's actually a good thing. But in America, we don't have that problem, and so most people would see sending your kid to a monastery as a hardship.
Jan?
My question goes into the day-to-day. Is there a pull or a draw to helping others? I understand that a person who's on the path, or whatever your phrase would be, needs to find a teacher, and that's a way of helping others. But I'm just thinking there are so many different ways people are led to help others, and I wonder if that's a part of these traditions.
Yeah, not so much in Tibetan Buddhism, not like it is in Christianity, where your focus is, your practice of compassion is going out into the community and helping those who are less fortunate. In Buddhism, the reason it took me a long time to understand this, but so Buddhists believe that everything that's going on here is kind of meaningless. It's what we call samsara. It's birth, rebirth, and death, and it's all an illusion. None of it is real. And I'm not smart enough or eloquent enough to really explain that. That's a very, very, very deep teaching. But basically, if you believe that this life is really just kind of busy work, there's nothing really meaningful going on here, and that the only way to really truly help beings is to get enlightened, then conceivably you could spend your entire lifetime in solitary retreat working on getting enlightened, and be a far more benefit to someone, to all beings, than if you spent your life serving the poor. Does that kind of answer your question? I didn't say it very well, but
I think it was a hard question. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. But having said that, Buddhism, also the foundation of Buddhism is compassion, and you can't get enlightened without compassion. And one of the very best ways to cultivate compassion is to serve those who are less fortunate. So that also is very important. You guys ask such great questions.
Yeah, Jane.
Laura, how did you become a Tibetan Buddhist?
Well, how long do you have?
The less than 10-minute version.
Okay. The short answer is that, like I said, my parents were not religious. I did not grow up with any kind of religious education or experience. But I was always kind of looking for the truth, and Buddhist teachings made sense to me. but, you know, being the kind of person that has to go out and figure it out myself, you know, I wasn't just going to take anybody's word for it or read a book and say, okay. I I decided that, you know, I had read about this concept of emptiness, you know, that everything's an illusion and that none of this is real and that really it's just all empty. And I was like, well, how can I possibly discover emptiness and realize emptiness if I'm working and I have to pay taxes and I have to pay insurance and, just the whole rigmarole. And so I decided to drop out of society. And I did that for 3 years and realized why you need a teacher in order to realize emptiness, because you can get yourself into a whole lot of trouble if you're trying to do it by yourself. And, having dropped out of society and realized that I couldn't get back in again, once you don't have a license and you don't have an address, and I mean, how do you get a place to live? How do you get a job? I was completely locked out of society and I couldn't get back in, and I was terrified. And my family couldn't help me. They were trying to incarcerate me because, they thought that that was the way to help me. And I had nowhere to go. And I had met the Sakyas years ago at the monastery. And I felt this connection to them. And so I showed up on my Lama's doorstep, and I was like scrubbing the kitchen floor with a toothbrush, and he was like, okay, all right, we have this room upstairs, why don't you stay here and, until you get a job. And so he rescued me, and that gave me faith.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you for asking.
We still have a good 5 minutes. Yeah, Mary.
My faith supports me on a daily basis, and it's really important to my personal life that way. I'm wondering how Buddhism, if it does that for you, and how, if it does.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, faith is very personal. We all relate to it, and even if we are from the same religion, we all kind of have a different relationship with faith. But for me, it's my Lama, the Lama who rescued me, who is he is an enlightened being. He passed away in 2016, but because he's an enlightened being, his consciousness is around. And so I kind of think of him, I guess, as in the same way that Christians might think of Jesus, as a guide and a guru, a teacher, maybe not somebody that you can see, but who is there. And in Vajrayana Buddhism, there is no difference between your teacher and the Buddha. They are exactly the same. And then when you do your practice, there's no difference between you and your teacher and the Buddha. You're all the same. And so I always, I always have my teacher in my heart. And when I get distressed, I pray, I say prayers, I pray and ask for help. And I say mantras, and the meaning of mantra is actually mind protection. So when I say the mantras, it definitely calms my mind. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah, I think we probably have a lot in common.
Yes.
Maybe not
I think so.
Maybe not the same doors, but a lot of the same processes, I think. And that
I think
common
so.
piece. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Christopher.
The family is very important in the Christian faith, how we relate. And so how does it, within Buddhism, we saw a picture of your daughter, a charming young lady. And so how is she walking with you in this journey? And how does that relate to other family members? And
Yeah,
just the
family.
family.
Yeah. No, in Buddhism, family is very important as well. In fact, we got our parents after the Buddha and the Lama, who are the same. So after the Lama, the parents are the most important thing. And that's because they gave us our precious human rebirth. They gave us our precious human mind. And without them, we would not even be able to practice religion, and we would not be able to get free from this suffering. And so we have a lot of reverence for our parents. And as far as my daughter goes, a lot of it is there are cultural differences between Tibetans and Americans, because obviously all Tibetans are born Buddhists. They don't choose other religions. They just all grow up Buddhists. Here it's a little different. So I've been raising my daughter as a Buddhist, and she goes to the monastery and she does the practices with us. And I think she probably thinks of herself as a Buddhist. Of course, that might change. When she grows up and is exposed to other religions, she might find a religion that works better for her. But for right now, I'm raising her as a Buddhist. I don't make her do the practices. I have my own meditation practice. I don't make her do a daily practice or anything, but when we go to the monastery, she goes with me.
Well, thank you, Laura. We are at the end of our time. I'm really grateful to you. And at this point in our time together, our tradition during COVID has been to shift from our class into a very brief Christian worship service called Compline. And you are welcome to stay and be part of that if you like, or to go on with your evening. Either way is fine. But I just want to give you a round of applause and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with each and every one of you, and I'm very touched by your open-mindedness, and I don't know, I can just see a lot of beauty in your community, and love and intelligence. So it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. And of course, I want to let everybody know, including those watching out there on Facebook, that next week we will have part 4, the final part of our series on ancestry traditions. And we will have Jamal Rahman from the Islamic Center in Bellevue to talk about Muslim traditions regarding ancestors. So we can look forward to that together. And Laura, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.